Ladies and gentlemen, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, it won't have escaped your notice that today is the 95th birthday of Prince Philip, and tomorrow is the 90th anniversary of Her Majesty the Queen. I would like you to all stand up and raise your glass or coffee cup to Her Majesty the Queen and Prince Philip. Thank you. I think that's a first. I would ask you now to give an extremely warm welcome to our panel.
Thank you very much, Howard. I'm Kamal Ahmed. I'm the economics editor of the BBC. Welcome, all of you, today. I am joined by two experts, and luckily I'm in the middle, so I'm going to try and keep them apart as much as I can. On my left, not politically, of course, on my left is Daniel Hannan, MEP, one of the most passionate men when it comes to arguing about our relationship with the European Union and why that relationship should fundamentally change. And of course, we have the big test on June the 23rd. On my right, Roland Rudd, now the second most famous Rudd in the Rudd household after Amber Rudd's fantastic performance yesterday in the ITV debate. Amber is Roland's sister. Roland, a passionate advocate of the case for staying in the European Union. They're going to give us 3 or 4, and I mean 3 or 4 minutes each, gentlemen, to lay out their case. I will then prod around a bit in what they've said, and then we'll come to a few questions. Just before we start, though, I just want to take the temperature of this highly brainy room. So, those who think, on balance, it is better that Britain remains in the European Union, please raise your hand. And those that think, on balance, it would be better if Britain left the European Union, please raise your hands. You've got a job of work to do, Daniel. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Kamal. Thank you very much. And first of all, can I say a huge thank you to Lord Lee, who is one of the most enthusiastic, generous, and kind people I know. And thank you to all of you for contributing to Jewish care. You know, governments like to think that they're in charge of doing all these things, and they do them very well. I wish that governments had anything like the capacity that organizations of this kind have when it comes to doing the really important thing. Sometimes the most useful thing a politician can do is just move the rocks and let the grass grow. So please, all of you who are about to contribute, don't think it goes unappreciated. Okay, in 4 minutes. I can see, looking around the room, that you're all much too young to remember the 1975 referendum. I wonder whether we could look at what's changed since then. 1975 was not a great time for this country. It's the era of the 3-day week, prices and incomes policies. We're the sick man of Europe, double-digit inflation. People looked across the channel and they thought, wow, these guys have done something right. Maybe we should hitch our wagon to that locomotive. Does anyone looking across the channel today and seeing the twin crises of the euro and Schengen, these twin disasters, the migratory and monetary catastrophes unfolding, does anyone feel now that this is something we'd be rushing to join today if we were not already in it, if we were not held in by the vested interests of people who have learned how to make a handy living out of the status quo, including, by the way, me, right? I wouldn't be inviting you to dismiss me from a very well-paid job with large tax-free expenses. Everything you've read about Brussels sleaze double it, right? I would not be inviting you to do that if I were not convinced that the country as a whole, the economy as a whole, would prosper outside, and that therefore, incidentally, there'll be some job openings for newly unemployed MEPs, maybe to do something even more useful than regulating the rest of you from Brussels. What's moved on since 1975? Well, when we joined, the European Union was 36% of the world economy. Today, it's 17%. All of the growth has happened across the oceans. In the last 10 years, the Chinese economy has doubled, the Indian economy has doubled, the Ethiopian economy has doubled in size. The Eurozone, incredibly, was the same size at the beginning of this year as it had been in 2006. 10 years ago, the EU was taking 55% of our exports. Last year, it was taking 45%. Where's that figure going to be in 2030 or in 2050? How low does it have to go before we drop the bizarre idea that we need to merge our political institutions with those of the world's only shrinking trade bloc, only stagnant customs union at the western tip of the Eurasian landmass, let alone that we should pay for the privilege of belonging to it. 20 billion gross, 10 billion pounds net every year. To put that figure in context, in the last Parliament, in the 2010 to 2015 Parliament, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the cuts programme across the whole of government spending saved £36 billion. Over the lifetime of that same Parliament, our gross contribution to the EU was £85 billion, our net contribution was £42 billion. So even if you take the net figure, even if we go along with this pretense that all the money spent by Brussels here is spent as we would have chosen, rather than spent on purchasing the loyalty of powerful and articulate interest groups, that one clean excision would have wiped out the whole of the austerity programme across the whole of government spending and still have given us enough left over to take a penny off income tax. One other thing that we've seen since 1975 is how much the lack of democracy, the lack of accountability in Brussels matters. See, if the EU were just a trade area, if it were just a forum for regional cooperation, then it wouldn't matter that commissioners are unelected any more than it matters that we don't elect the people who run the World Bank or the IMF or whatever. But no one, surely after 40 years, can deny the political aspirations of this body. If the EU were just a club for neighbouring countries to get together, can we take it for granted that no one would have a problem with that, right? We wouldn't now be having this debate. We wouldn't now be having this referendum. You'd have to be insane to be against the idea of neighbouring countries getting together to collaborate, arbitrate their disputes, and achieve collectively what they can't do singly. The problem is that the EU doesn't stop at national borders. It presumes to regulate and legislate in almost every field of life. It's acquired one by one the attributes and trappings of statehood. Passport, currency, foreign policy, representation in third bodies, national anthem, flag, all the rest of it. And at that point, the fact that its leaders are unelected does become an issue. In fact, it's not just that the European commissioners are undemocratic in the sense that they're not elected by everyone. Actually, uniquely in the world, we've contrived a system that is anti-democratic in the sense that you generally have to have lost an election before you get to be a European commissioner. So it's only when, like Neil Kinnock or Chris Patten or indeed now Jean-Claude Juncker, it's only when you've been expressly rejected by your voters that you are invited to come and legislate for them. Ladies and gentlemen, saying that doesn't make you anti-Europe, okay? I speak French and Spanish. I've lived and worked all over the continent, right? If Britain were run this way, if we were governed by 28 unelected British commissioners, and if they, as a result of being immune to public opinion, invulnerable to the ballot box, had come out with such disastrous failures as the common agricultural policy, the common fisheries policy, the euro, the Schengen area, I'd be against that. I hope all of you would be. That wouldn't make you anti-British. It wouldn't make you Anglo-skeptics. It would make you Democrats. One last thought before I hand over to Roland. There is no status quo on the ballot paper in 2 weeks' time. There will be some people in this room who think, you know what, I'm very happy that we should be properly European, we should go in with both feet, and we should accept that our future is part of a political amalgamation in Europe. That's fine. That is an honourable position, not one I agree with, but it's a perfectly legitimate point of view. And then if that's what you think, you should vote Remain with a clear conscience, because every vote in Brussels for Remain will be taken as an endorsement of what they've said they want to do, the military amalgamation, the political amalgamation, the economic and fiscal amalgamation. But don't imagine that you can cast a qualified or half-hearted Remain vote. Don't imagine that you can vote Remain and then somehow get reform. The Prime Minister spent 2 years crisscrossing the continent trying to get a better deal. And what did he come back with? Not one penny off our contributions, not a single power repatriated, not even a new treaty. That's how intractable the European Union showed itself to be. That's how unable or unwilling to reform. And so before you vote, ask yourselves just one question. If this is how the European Union treats us now, their second largest financial contributor, before we have our referendum on leaving, how would we be treated the day after we had voted to remain? The idea that I could go back as an MEP and say we don't want this or that, I would be laughed at, and with reason. Voting to remain in is not the same as voting to remain where we are. Voting to remain in means tacitly endorsing everything that is coming our way. Every Remain ballot will be taken in Brussels as a warm endorsement. Carry on, guys, you're doing a brilliant job. A little bit more, please. And that's the only question you need to face. Do we want more integration, or do we want a relationship with the EU based on a common market, not a common government? But the status quo is not on the ballot paper. If you believe in a federal Europe, if you want some kind of greater union, as I say, fine. Good luck to you. We're not going to agree. Right? But don't let anyone bully you out of doing what you feel to be the right thing. Don't vote in favour despite reservations about the way Brussels is going because you think that we couldn't make a go of it as an independent country. We are the 5th largest economy in the world, the 4th military power, one of 5 permanent seat holders on the UN Security Council. Our language is the most widely studied by the human species. We're sitting here in the world's capital city. How much bigger do we have to be before we can live under our own laws, trading and cooperating with our friends in Europe and on other continents, but governing ourselves? This ultimately comes down to self-confidence. Do we think that we are uniquely in the world incapable of flourishing, electing our own representatives, that we can't manage the way that New Zealand or Japan or Canada or any other country? If that's what you feel, then by all means vote Remain. But if you think that this country's song is not yet sung, that we still have more to give, that our future lies before us, then vote to leave.
Thank you, Daniel. Roland, your riposte.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, and it's wonderful this morning to be here at Jewish Care, and I end the day in Wells Cathedral in Somerset, also arguing the same type of issue with Jacob Rees-Mogg this evening. So Daniel said we are indeed the 5th largest economy in the world, and it's interesting that we became the 5th largest economy in the world while we were members of the European Union. It hasn't seemed to have done us much harm economically over the last 42 years. And actually, I can remember the last referendum, unlike Daniel, in '75, and it was about the economy. It was very much centre squared about the economy, as it has been during this referendum. And it's the reason that it's been part of the economy has been so important during this referendum is, of course, because of the single market. It is, after all, a British invention. It's something that Margaret Thatcher rightly decided that she was going to give up her veto in this particular area to ensure it got through, and we were going to embrace qualified majority voting to see it through because she was worried about protectionist views of one or two other European countries, and we got it through. And it's been an amazing achievement. Just think about it. It is an extraordinary market. It's 500 million people. It's one set of regulations and rules for 28 countries for goods, partly for services, and right now we're going to extend it right across for services in the digital market, in the energy market, and Britain is going to actually benefit more than any other country in the European Union because this is what makes up more of our economy than any other country. Now, at the beginning of this campaign, Vote Leave was saying we could remain in the single market and we could have no migration. And as this debate continued, they were under attack for sort of adopting the sort of know-nothing rhetoric of Donald Trump. of sort of assuming that something would happen because they would continue to say it. And finally, the co-chair of Daniel's campaign, Michael Gove, gave clarity to this and actually brought some logic to the debate and said we were going to come out of the single market and we were going to adopt the Albanian model and we were going to trade with the European Union, but outside the single market. And I don't think Albania had ever had so much publicity in 1 week in recent history. It's quite difficult if you're the Prime Minister of Albania to actually catch the news, but Michael managed to give it to him and he was absolutely delighted with his moment in the sun. The only thing is, the Prime Minister of Albania doesn't much like the Albanian model. He sort of thinks our model is sort of preferable and said so. But anyway, we had clarity in this debate. We are going to come out of the single market. And Daniel mentions the IFS. Well, the IFS says if we come out of the single market, we could be 20 to 40 billion worse off by coming out. And of course, that leads us into this huge sleuth of experts. And of course, we've had the governor of the Bank of England, we've had the OECD, we've had the IMF, but I'm not going to list all the various organizations and economic organizations who say we'll be worse off if we come out, because I'll go over my 4 minutes. But of course, there's been this sort of anti-experts. We don't need experts to tell us what to do. But it is interesting that there isn't a single credible economic organization that actually says coming out of the single market wouldn't be self-harming our economy. So then, during this campaign, we moved last week from the economy, which Vote Leave said was going to be their real purpose. And remember, when this referendum started, we had all this stuff about Vote Leave weren't going to talk about immigration. That was up to Nigel Farage, and that was up to Aaron Banks, and we weren't going to do this sort of nasty talk about foreigners because Vote Leave was different. And we did the economy, we had the Albanian model, it didn't go down very well, and what's happened? We've had a week of immigration. And we've had a week of the only reason really to vote to leave is because then you stop migration. Now, I think perhaps we haven't handled this particular issue the best we could, because I think there are some very positive reasons to actually talk about immigration. I actually think that the fact that they actually contribute $2.5 billion in taxes to this country, that there are 250,000 immigrants working in the health service, in schools and social services. As Nicola Sturgeon said last night, you know, if you go into A&E, you bump into an East European, they're more likely to be treating you. These are very positive reasons. And I think Britain has been historically excellent at actually amalgamating and integrating immigrants as they come to Britain. And of course, if we leave, one of the issues that Daniel's side has to face is that they've said immigrants from the rest of the world should increase. We should have more people from the Commonwealth. We should have more Indian doctors. We should have more Chinese skilled workers. And yet, there are more immigrants coming from the rest of the world than there are from Europe. So we wouldn't actually deal with the issue of immigration. And of course, we'd leave the border open between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and then we'd get more illegal immigration. So I actually think we can actually stand tall and make the arguments about immigration, but I do think it's interesting that Vote Leave's prime attraction that they want to put before you is to come out and stop immigration. And my final point is about security, because I do think there's a wonderful irony that when Vote Leave say, you know, of course we've had peace for the last, we've had peace for the last 42 years while we've been within the European Union, but it has nothing to do with the European Union. It's just a coincidence. And of course, I wouldn't stand here and say to you that the peace we've had over the last decades is all to do with the European Union. Of course I wouldn't. But I would say that the rivalries, the bitter jealousies, the hatred sometimes that European Union nations have had for one another has been swept away in a new order where we actually genuinely cooperate and come together for greater interests. And when I look at it recently and look at the threat to the East, and you see a nationalistic, autocratic, repressive kleptomaniac in Putin, and you see how he threatens East European nations, and the fact that they are part of the European Union family, the fact that when he uses cyber terrorism to try to undermine these countries, we stand tall together. When he invaded a European country in the Ukraine in the most disgraceful way, we stand tall, and we had a single foreign policy. And we said to Putin, this is unacceptable, and we implemented not one, but 2 sets of economic sanctions. And I've had the privilege of being on the army board for 6 years. And I have to tell you, it is the view of the generals that the reason that Putin stopped where he stopped was because of those economic sanctions. As a nuclear power, NATO couldn't threaten him, but the European Union could do something, and do something incredibly important. And I think together, united, when we can face down our enemies, face down those who threaten democracy, and actually put at the heart the rule of law, human rights, democracy, as well as the economic arguments, I would urge you all to actually vote to stay in the European Union, which is a force for good. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. Certainly incredibly passionate. So, Daniel, let's start with you. 2 points that Roland made, which I think are important, is the security issue, and also what model would you have if Britain leaves the European Union in terms of our relationship with what is still our most important trading partner. So, first off, one big supporter of us leaving the European Union is Putin.
Well, not according to Putin. I mean, the Russian embassy keeps saying we have no view on this. And it's much easier to conjure these imaginary Eurosceptics like Putin rather than deal with what the Leave side is actually saying. I was struck when Roland said we should be exporting democracy and the rule of law. I mean, would you say that the European Union is a great model of democracy and the rule of law? You know, is it a model of democracy? The old joke in Brussels is that if it were a country applying to join itself, it would be turned down because it fails to meet the most basic democratic standards.
The point being made is that Putin listens because the EU speaks with one voice.
So on the security thing, there are necessarily risks and uncertainties whatever we do, okay? Don't confuse familiarity with certainty. If we stay in, there are uncertainties. If we leave, there are uncertainties. The one thing we know is that in a necessarily uncertain world, it must be safer to take back control so that we can mitigate the risks ourselves than it is to hand power to people who may not have our interests at heart. Of course, we will continue to play our part as a member of the Western Alliance. The people who took the strongest line in Ukraine were us and Canada, and then the United States, while the Germans were still fretting about their Gazprom deals and all the rest of it. You know, this is not something that you need to be in the European Union to deal with. We are a global country with interests that connect us to every continent and archipelago. We don't need to moderate our foreign policy through Federica Mogherini and the European Commission. As for what would be the model, I think this is a really important issue. You know, we're not accustomed to referendums in this country. And so very naturally, we tend to think in terms of general elections. And therefore, behind a lot of the questioning is the assumption that if you vote to leave, you are voting to elect the Leave campaign. But if you stop and think about it for a few seconds, that's not what a referendum is, right? A referendum is a mandate. A referendum is instructing the government, like you instruct a barrister. It's saying to the government, please get us out. Now over to you to do it on the best terms you can get while being fair to our friends and allies across the Channel and within a timescale that works for both sides. So in a way, all of these questions about, you know, where does Michael Gove stand on farm subsidies or what, it doesn't really matter because he's not going to be the guy running it. What we're saying is don't trust. We're not asking you to trust Michael Gove or Boris or me. We're asking you to trust the British people. We're asking you to say, we as a country will decide these matters for ourselves. rather than having decisions imposed on us by people whose interests may not be our own.
So you don't know, or do you have a view then on what the model should be? What's the best model?
The one thing we absolutely do know is that there won't be any tariffs between our trade and that of the EU. And the reason we can say that with 100% certainty is that there is no country in Europe, except one, that faces such trade barriers. If you look at any non-EU territory that is geographically in Europe, Isle of Man, Monaco, Montenegro, Macedonia, Norway, Switzerland, Serbia, any of them, they all have tariff-free access. They're all part of a pan-continental common market, a free trade area that stretches from non-EU Iceland to non-EU Turkey. The only country that's geographically in Europe that has chosen to stand aside from that common market is Belarus, which has decided instead to go in with Putin. I have never, in 17 years as an MEP, I have never heard anyone suggest that Britain would be excluded from that common market simply because we had chosen to stand aside from the political institutions like the common criminal justice policy, the common fisheries policy, and so on. So that much I think we can take as read. I think there probably will still be free movement of labor, right? In the sense that if you have a job offer in another country, you'll be able to take it up. We had that since 1973. What changed was the Maastricht Treaty, which introduced European citizenship. And that's what gives you a legal right to reside in any other country. It gives you the right to family reunification, to benefits claims, to university tuition, freedom from deportation, all of these cases where we can't get rid of Abu Hamza's daughter-in-law and so on. That's all about being EU citizens. And that is, I think, what would change. So we would have some more control over who comes in. But I'll say, frankly, if anyone is voting to leave, if anyone in this room, the small number of you who are on my side, are voting to leave thinking that we're going to start deporting Polish barmaids and stuff, you're going to be disappointed, right? It's not going to happen. You know, we're not going to be airlifting pensioners from the Costa. So, you know, there is still going to be quite a lot of migration both ways. All we are asking for is some control, right? We're not against net inward economic migration. We just want a sense that ultimately we are in charge of roughly who comes in and roughly in what numbers.
Daniel, if we are still members of the common market in some sense, do you think we will still need to contribute to the single market?
Well, you pay, if you like, your subs to every international association, right, to the Commonwealth, the IMF, whatever. What you wouldn't be part of, I mean, if you look at the per capita contributions, Iceland pays about 1/6 of what we do as a member of the EEA, Switzerland slightly less as a member of EFTA. We wouldn't be chipping in for the Common Agricultural Policy, the regional development funds, the cohesion funds, the foreign aid stuff. So, of course, as with any organization, you pay your share of the cost of the joint administrative institutions. But we would no longer be handing a chunk of our budget to the EU then to spend here.
Roland, on the economics, Britain, 5th largest economy in the world, one of the most important destinations for exports from the European Union to our country. Why on earth wouldn't the European Union want to do an excellent trade deal with Britain if we left the European Union? We would not be like Switzerland or Norway because we are more important.
Yeah, I mean, we would indeed be different. But as I say, there has been absolute clarity from Vote Leave that we would leave the single market. So we know what would happen. I mean, Daniel says, you know, all we have to do is stand aside. We're not standing aside. We are leaving an organization we've been part of for 42 years. We are leaving the single market that we actually helped set up. It would have huge ramifications. Now, of course, so 44% of our trade is with the European Union. It's around 7% of their trade with us. It's worth around 13% of our GDP, and it's worth around 3% of their GDP. So, you know, in the event of a major row, I just let you decide who has the most to lose. Now, Daniel says nothing would change if we sort of stood aside from this organization. We all know huge amount would change. And, you know, at the very least, we all know we were not going to kid ourselves that there wouldn't be a change of government. We would end up with a right-wing, nationalistic, English populist government led by Boris Johnson and Michael Gove. Okay? It's absolutely clear that would happen. And we know Michael's been very clear about what would happen. He would start by vetoing every single EU treaty until he got what he wanted. Now, I just don't think that is the right way to deal with these things. I think we'd end up, if he actually did that, we'd end up with a really bitter, nasty divorce that would carry on with years of uncertainty. Never mind 2 years of triggering Article 50.
That's for the British public to decide.
Yeah.
The makeup of the government that would deal with the European Union, the British voters would have a chance to do that in 2020. What I'm asking you is about the longer-term economic relationship between Britain and the European Union. And also the other point being that wouldn't Britain more easily be able to sign free trade agreements with America, with China, with emerging markets in Asia, if we didn't have to deal with 27 other nations?
No, because I don't think it's the way it works. I mean, it's not. I mean, the problem is that this debate shouldn't be framed as the European Union is here and Britain is here, and all these things are done to us. We have huge influence in these trade agreements. That's why we've been part of 50 free trade agreements around the world through the European Union. We've obviously got the heft and the muscle of being part of 28 nations and 500 million people in the single market. It's an extraordinary negotiating tool. And that's why we should indeed stay where we are. And that's why every single major world leader that we deal with, including those of the Commonwealth, have expressly suggested that Britain is much better off in doing trade, in any of its international relations, by being part of the European Union.
Why has the In campaign, the general debate of those who support Britain's membership of the European Union, had such difficulty with the immigration question? And the one thing you get, particularly outside London and the rarefied atmospheres that we sit mostly in, is that it's the first thing they say, the reason people are voting against staying in the European Union is immigration and the free movement of people.
No, listen, I understand that, and I think it's a perfectly fair criticism in the sense of I think we don't have anything to be ashamed about what's happened with free movement of people. I think it's a good thing. I think we should say it. I've tried to outline some of the benefits. They're economic, they're cultural.
David Cameron nervous of it?
Yeah, well, yes, I think that's probably true. You know, he's also got a policy about reducing immigration down to tens of thousands, which is clearly not doable. But it's not doable whether you're in the European Union or outside the European Union. And I do want to make this point, that I do think it is, I mean, at the one hand, in terms of whipping up people's fear of immigration, whipping up people's fear of what people are doing from other countries, and where they're living, and at the same time purporting to want more people to come from the Commonwealth, I think is extremely irresponsible, because actually what people are trying to say in Vote Leave is they're trying to, and I do absolutely exclude Daniel from this, but they are trying to say they want less immigration, and in some cases they want almost no immigration, because when you ask people, when you're debating against them, you know, what net immigration do you want from the rest of the world, which is running at about 188,000, they won't tell you. And so you can only deduce from that that actually the answer is almost none. And that has had some traction in some parts of the country. But I think also, when we talk, I think most people understand the benefits of the single market are good for Britain, but they don't always actually trickle out in every part of Britain. So I spent a day in Wolverhampton, and a lot of people said to me, look, I can see that Britain benefits by being part of this, but how do I benefit if I can't get onto the housing ladder, or I'm having difficulty in getting a job? And somehow, making sure that the benefits from the single market in some form of social fund actually get to other parts of poorer Britain, I think is also an important issue.
Thank you, Roland. Well, much passion up here. Let's have some questions. Let's get some passion from the floor. Gentleman there and a gentleman to the left. If you just say who you are, that'd be fabulous.
Gerald Davidson. Roland, you were quite a big supporter of the euro. And I remember 20 odd years ago, we would be talking about adopting the euro. It's proven to be an unmitigated disaster, especially in the southern Mediterranean countries. You were great exponents of us joining the euro. What makes you right now on this argument?
Well, thank you, Gerald. It's a very good question. But I wasn't a big exponent of the euro. No, I really wasn't. Honestly, I wasn't. And the thing is, I did join an organization called Britain in Europe, but I joined it not only after Gordon Brown had his 5 economic tests, but after he had opined on the 5 economic tests, and they had decided not to join the euro. I think Britain has the best possible option. We are outside the euro, we are outside Schengen free borders, but we're in the single market.
Did you support Britain joining the euro?
No.
In 2008 you said we should adopt the euro.
No. It's not actually, because I can fully understand. I fully understand that you wouldn't have time to finish any articles I've actually written. But having actually wrote them, I do remember what they said. But I said.
What did they say?
They said in 2008. I said that.
Touching your ear, that's a reveal.
I said. I said that the currency. I said that our currency was falling. And there was a strong likelihood that people would try and put the euro back on the agenda, but I ended up by making it very clear that I thought the risks would outweigh any benefits of joining the euro. But I just say this, look, there are people in our camp who did support the euro, but it doesn't mean that they're wrong now. There are plenty of people on Daniel's side, including Michael Gove, who thought the Iraq war was really a wonderful piece of foreign policy. And continue to say so 5 years afterwards. And just because Michael was wrong then doesn't mean that he's necessarily wrong now.
So, there's a gentleman there, yeah, and then the gentleman behind him.
Jeremy Mendel. Isn't the problem with the Remain case, so if you look at Jean-Claude Juncker, yeah, and doesn't he show 2 things? One is, none of us voted for him. At least with our politicians, we can kick them out if we get upset with them. You know, if your sister messes up Hinkley Point C, hopefully the voters of Hastings and Rye will get rid of her when we get blackouts. But the problem with Juncker is he's not accountable to anybody. And the other point about him is he's been issuing blood-curdling threats about what will happen to us if we leave, punishments. And he's not even been elected by our leader because Cameron fought against him really hard, tried to avoid it, and he was only given the support of Hungary. That's all the support we got to keep Juncker out of the top job for which none of us have voted.
We can't chuck him out.
No, but look, the Council of Ministers is elected. The Council of Ministers are our ministers who we elect, who are actually appoint the Commission. Okay, so just because the US cabinet is not elected doesn't mean that the US doesn't have democracy, or that the French cabinet is not elected. There are elected politicians who sit above the officials who are tasked with running the show. And that's what happens with the European Union. And by the way, we can get rid of the Commission. We did so with Jacques Santer in '99. So you can actually get rid of them. So we should remember that it's not just about the Commission.
Can I just pick up on a couple of the points that have come up? First, what we want on immigration is democratic control. There are people who will say the current level is right. There are people who say we want more. There are people who say we want less. There are people who say we want a different quality of migrant so that we can concentrate on taking people who bring skills to this country rather than on anyone who happens to hold an EU passport. But it should be up to Parliament and people to decide. I don't think that is an extreme or immoderate position by any definition. On trade, even now, I don't think this point is very widely understood. When you join the European Union, it's not a free trade area, it's a customs union. That means you surrender to Brussels 100% your right to sign free trade agreements with countries outside. So Switzerland, while having complete free trade within Europe, also has a free trade agreement with China. We can't do that because the EU isn't talking to China. The EU isn't agreeing a trade deal with India. 9 years it's been postponing it, right? Is there a country in this part of the world that would gain more from free trade with India. It's English-speaking common law. There are 1.4 million Brits of Indian origin. We can't have one. We don't have a free trade agreement with Australia because some Italian tomato growers have held it up in an unrelated dispute. How is that in our interest? What we are asking for is the ability to sign our own trade deals with the bits of the world that are growing. And may I just say one last thing on the euro, because Roland's having his selective, I mean, I know we're here to commemorate dementia and support people who are forgetting things, but he and his organization were very, very clear. And what's striking about what we're hearing now is not just that it's the same people, Mike Rake and Richard Branson and Peter Mandelson and Michael Heseltine, it's that they're using exactly the same argument. What they said was that if we kept the pound, there would be disinvestment, there'd be a slump, the stock exchange would collapse, and we'd be poorer, and unemployment would rise. And what happened? It's not just that they were wrong. It's not just that those things didn't happen. It's that those things did happen to the Eurozone. Could they have been more wrong? So why should we listen to exactly the same people trotting out exactly the same flawed arguments 15 years later?
Gentleman at the back, a lady there, and a gentleman down here. Yeah.
Daniel, my name is David Tasker. Can I just express my admiration for your amazing delivery style? Your voice is delicious. In fact, I'd pay you to come and read bedtime stories to my children.
Who was that aimed at? You, Dave?
As a consequence of your delightful delivery style, I was hanging on every single word, and I was waiting for you to tell us what the future would look like. The only words you used were, "Don't think we couldn't make a go of it." And even subsequently, when Kamal gave you an opportunity to bring that out, what the world would look like in future, you said we would probably have free movement of trade.
Yes, because I won't be the Prime Minister, and it would be presumptuous of me to lay down precisely in detail how the British people are going to choose to order their relations with the rest of the world. But what I would say is that every other non-EU state seems to manage. There are 193 states and territories represented at the United Nations. 165 of them are not in the European Union. And the ones that are doing best are in that 165, including Norway and Switzerland, the two wealthiest countries in the world, both of which are in Europe but outside the European Union. And nowhere else in the world are people expected to be apologetic or awkward about the fact that they want to take their own decisions. You know, New Zealand is not applying to join Australia. And people don't go around saying, oh, these Australo-skeptics on their little offshore island clinging to 19th century notions of sovereignty, when are they going to join the modern world? You know, Japan has not asked to join China, as far as I'm aware. And people don't go around saying, oh, these bigoted Sino-skeptics, when are they going to get it through their heads that they've lost their empire? It is a natural, healthy thing for a democracy to live under its own laws, trading and cooperating with friends on every continent.
2 quick points, a lady there, and then a gentleman down here. Yeah.
Thank you. Marie van der Zyl. Daniel, can I say, you're also so persuasive, you could almost make me change my mind. But turning away from an economic perspective, from a Jewish perspective, can I ask you what you see the implications are from either staying or leaving in Europe, particularly relating to anti-Semitism and other issues? Thank you.
Okay. So it's this notion, Daniel, that the Leave campaign is whipping up an uncomfortable instinct.
Well, I don't think that was the question. The question was about, I mean, I think there are, you know, there is a general, if we're looking at issues of specific concern to the community, right, let's say the future of Chiquita, right, I can't say for sure what will happen in terms of EU regulation or British regulation. I can only make the general point that it must be safer to take power back so that we can control it. But I will say one thing that will be of interest, I think, to the community, even if it's not a specific EU legislative issue. And it's something that it's a question that I'm asked very often by Jewish and by Gentile constituents. And it's about why it is that Israel seems to struggle to get a fair hearing in Brussels. Right? Israel, of course, should be criticized when it does bad things, like every other country, including Britain, right? No country should be beyond it. But the disproportionate focus, day after day, motion after motion, resolution after resolution, condemning what is, at the end of the day, a very small country. Where does it come from? And I think the answer is, I mean, a lot of people say, oh, it's anti-Semitism. I don't think that's right. I mean, it may be in some cases, but that's not the big thing. I think there's something else going on, and it took me a while to see this as an MEP. The European Union is based around the idea that national loyalties are arbitrary, transient, and ultimately discreditable. But there is no clearer example in human history of the success of the national principle than the State of Israel. It's an amazing story. Here you have a people who for 2,000 years are stateless and scattered of nationhood. Next year in Jerusalem. And then one day, against all the odds, miraculously, providentially we might say, it's fulfilled. Now, I find that an uplifting story. But if we accept the basic legitimacy of the Jewish state, if we are accepting the idea that people really are better off living under their own laws and their own people in their own national unit, then everything the European Union has been doing since 1956 is basically wrong. Because the European Union is based around the idea that nation states are obsolete, that we should be tearing down walls instead of building them up, that we should have regional unions, that national democracy is a thing of the past. So is it any wonder that Israelis are always going to struggle to get a fair hearing in Brussels? It's not because of some deep prejudice against them, it's because the very fact of representing a nation state makes it unfashionable.
One final question. I'm just very aware of the time. Just down here, and that'll be the last one. So sorry. Sir.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you. Everybody, including the Prime Minister and indeed Mr. Rudd, now agrees that the single currency is an absolute unmitigated disaster. I'm a businessman and I have to make business decisions every day. And if somebody said to me, would you invest in an enterprise that hasn't grown for 10 years, that hasn't had its accounts signed off by the auditors for 20 years, and has a financial and economic strategy that everyone thinks is a disaster, there is no way that I would invest in that enterprise. So why, Mr. Rudd, do you want us all to invest in that enterprise?
Well, there are a couple of things. So, first of all, the accounts have been signed off since 2007. Number two, the European Union grew by 2%. Now, I agree that's not great growth. But just remember, this year, right, we've had Latin America, excuse me, in negative growth, 0.3% down. We've had Japan and Canada both growing more slowly than the European Union. It is growing, and I believe it will continue to grow. But remember, it's not just that it's growing and that there are other areas that are actually doing worse. It's that geographically, because we are right by the European Union, it stands to reason that we trade so much more with the European Union than we do with anyone else. And we're going to continue to do that. But of course, because the shifting sands in terms of population, emerging markets are obviously growing at a much faster rate than the growth rate in the European Union. It also stands to reason that our actual growth rate with India and China should commensurately grow more over time because of those population shifts. But we will continue, the vast bulk of our trade, it's 44% now, will continue to be with the European Union. But I just want to pick up a couple of very quick things that Daniel said. First of all, he said that by being in the European Union, we are not able to do our own trade deals, and we're allowing Brussels to negotiate them for us. But we don't allow Brussels to negotiate them. We are part of the process that negotiates these deals. We do from time to time actually have the trade commissioner who's British. We have a number of British people who are part of doing these actual deals on a sort of weekly, monthly, yearly basis. And when he keeps quoting Switzerland and this fantastic trade deal that Switzerland happens to have with China, just have a look at that trade deal. Because what it actually envisages, what it actually allows, is for Switzerland has had to open up its market to Chinese goods. But the China has ensured that Switzerland, its goods for exports are tiered over 7 years. There were some goods that the Swiss could actually immediately export to China, like cuckoo clocks. But actually, there wasn't a huge take-up. And, you can see the imbalance between these type of trade deals unless you actually do a trade deal as a bloc.
Thank you so much to Daniel and Roland. Just want to ask, 40 minutes of passionate debate. Who has changed their mind? Okay, one person at a time. Excellent. Thank you very much, Daniel and Roland.